We've all heard a lot of the stuff about Iran, especially Hezbollah, Hamas, Syria, and we've heard bits and pieces of Africa. But then we come to something like this, and we hear so much about their terrorism spreading throughout Africa, spreading throughout Europe, everywhere in the Middle East. Why in the world would President Obama allow them to have nuclear capabilities? He must hear these reports all the time, right? So, you know, for us, you know, we have other occupations, we come here, but knowing all this, why do they have nuclear capability?
Well, maybe I'll say something about it. I dropped my microphone. So, you're right. The premise of your question is right. I think that one of our top counterterrorism officials has said in public commentary that, you know, from time to time, it's not Al-Qaeda, it's not Sunni extremists that are at the top of the president's counterterrorism brief, it's Hezbollah and it's the Quds Force. And so clearly folks inside the administration are well aware that this is a threat. What I would say about it is that you have to, as I started my talk, connect these things and say that, look, Iran has a strategy. Nuclear weapons are a key part of that strategy. Terrorism is also a key part of that strategy. And you can sort of browbeat the Iranians into maybe making some concessions for now on their nuclear program, but that doesn't mean the strategy changes. It means that maybe they pause. It means that maybe they stop for now because you've got oil sanctions against them, and they wait until something else happens, like maybe the Russians invade Ukraine, that takes the attention of the international community off of them, right? There is, I think, a opposing narrative, one which I disagree with, but one which you'll hear a lot of in sort of the commentary on Iran and folks who speak around this town, especially on this issue, which is, no, this is all about mistrust. And if you can start to chip away at that mistrust, and maybe that requires making concessions to the Iranians in a nuclear agreement, they won't feel threatened and they won't do these things. I think that is too, to use, if I'm allowed to use the word, solipsistic. It suggests that everything Iran does is somehow a response to what we're doing, as opposed to, as I think Benjamin pointed out, they do this also domestically, as opposed to springing from their own strategy and their own motivations, which may have something to do with us, but it's not all about us. We often think that these issues are all about us. Unless Iran changes its strategy, has a strategic shift, as we say, or unless there's a change in Iran, I don't think you'll see these things go away. And I think it's very important that we act with that sort of realism in mind. I'm not confident that we're doing that right now. I actually have a plug for myself. I have a piece for this about this out today on our Institute's website.
Is that working? Can you hear me? First of all, I hope there's a lot of questions, because good questions are better than good answers. And you know, I'm never sure if the answers make sense. In terms of that question, I'm not really sure that this administration, as well as previous administrations, have internalized the fact that Iran has been waging a war against the United States since 1979. Whether it's high-intensity warfare, as we've seen with Hezbollah and their strategic partner in Beirut, or low-intensity warfare, the war continues, and it's a real problem. That's why I wish in 2009, when the Green Revolution took place and Iranian Democrats were on the street asking Obama, are you with us or you're against us, he chose to stay on the sidelines. Had he, I think, decided to join those millions of Iranians who were protesting, we might very well, I mean, again, I'm putting scary quotes on this, or killer quotes, I like that line. We might actually be living with a democratic Iran that's not working on a nuclear weapon system.
Actually, just in response to what you were saying, I was wondering what you thought was Iran's overarching goal. But I was also going to ask you, thank you very much, what you've said about the hemisphere of Africa is fantastic, but what about what's going on in our hemisphere in terms of Iran's influence, if you're aware of anything along those lines? Thank you.
Iran's overarching goal, I'm not sure how to respond to that. I think the main goal of the regime in Iran is its own survival. And remember that this is a big challenge for this regime, and I think we saw it most clearly in 2009, in June 2009, that the ideology upon which this regime rests is a 1979 ideology which does not seem to still be popular with the Iranian population, which is a young population and is a population that I think wants different things than the regime necessarily represents. And whatever you think of the election that they just held, the presidential election that brought Hassan Rouhani to office, I think what we can say, what we can generalize, is that when they're given a choice, Iranians will pick the candidate who most represents change in their mind. That doesn't represent continuity or necessarily the regime, but represents some kind of change, even if it's from a very bounded set of choices. So this is the challenge the regime has. How do they, despite this kind of flagging legitimacy at home, maintain enthusiasm for Velayat-e Faqih, this system which is anachronistic in many ways? That, I think, is what animates them, trying to use this kind of combination of old-style anti-imperialism and non-aligned sort of tactics, plus domestic repression, plus this kind of chest beating that you see from the military parades and so forth. It's all part and parcel of tactics which come straight out of the playbook of totalitarian regimes, from my point of view. And that doesn't mean, again, that sort of we are wrong to want to engage in the strategy we're engaging in on the nuclear program. This whole idea of diplomacy and pressure, it's supported by Israel, it's supported by the United States. But it means you have to be realistic. You have to be clear-eyed about who you're dealing with and not engage in these kind of, I think, naive fantasies about who's on the other side of the table from you.
Michael Shane from Boston. Just a couple of questions concerning the results of military action, if it was taken. If a military action was taken against the Iranian regime, one, what is your estimate on what the response would be? And two, would it have a discrediting effect? Everybody likes to follow a winner. If they're discredited in any major way, would that delegitimize themselves in Africa and in other places?
Concerning attacking Iran, I think I speak as an Israeli here. Hear me now? Yeah. So speaking from the home front command, as we say, the results, well, in my opinion at least, will be, and it may not be a famous opinion here, will be a barrage of rockets coming in from Hezbollah, Hamas, and other organizations that are now flowing in our backyard in the Golan Heights. So I think that the consequences for Israel are disastrous, and I don't even think, and I'm an ex-Air Force soldier, I don't even think the point of view of actually feasibility that it can be done in the sense of eradicating the nuclear program. So I think it's a mistake in this specific moment in time. Delegitimization, sorry, it's a hard word, of Iran in Africa, as you mentioned. I think that there, as I said, the friendly face aspect, there's so many anti-American, anti-French, anti-Israeli aspects. For instance, in South Africa, obviously, there's a reason behind it. Israel and the apartheid regime were close friends. I had worked with people that were engineers from the Kfir planes that were then copied into South Africa's apartheid regime. I'm not saying that this is a matter of policy in Israel at the time, a survival policy, which is, if you think about it, a little bit of what Iran's doing. Of course, again, I'm steering away from comparing us to Iran. I'm saying that survival tends to put us in difficult places. I don't think we'll be able to affect Robert Mugabe or South African Jacob Zuma and his ministers on the Israel aspect by attacking Iran or making them the losers, as you said. I think if you want to add.
Gil Mayer, New Jersey. There are obviously anti-regime forces within Iran, and what are we doing, and what can we do to strengthen and support those forces so that they have a greater impact in terms of delegitimizing or minimizing the impact of this government?
There are those kinds of forces, and they take the form of everything from sort of political opponents of the regime to groups which are actively fighting against the regime, especially in the Kurdish and the Balochi areas. And if you ask what are we doing to support them, we're really not supporting them at all. That's is the answer to that. Prior to, I would say, 2009, there was a lot of debate, not just in the United States, but in sort of Western circles about is it wise or is it not wise to try to get involved in that sort of thing? Because, and this goes to the previous question as well, what you want to do is target the regime, but what you don't want is to have a backlash from the entire country against you with this feeling of nationalism that suddenly erupts, which can happen. I mean, we shouldn't minimize that. We shouldn't assume that anything we do that's anti-regime will be supported by the people. On the other hand, then after 2009, what we started doing was we started designating these groups as terrorists. So, for example, the Kurdish, some Kurdish groups inside Iran, some Balochi groups inside Iran, in light of their activities inside the country. And I can't tell you exactly why this was done. Obviously, it's justified based upon the kind of statute that's in place. You can draw your own conclusions as to why we did that. But the truth is we're not doing much. I think that when it comes to, what can we do to help the Iranian people? Number one, I think that we need to remain clear-eyed, and this goes back to what Benjamin was saying about the regime. And the more that we sort of start to talk about this regime as though they're sanitized, as though they're not doing things like supporting terrorism or engaging in domestic repression, I think that's a mistake. I think we need to continue to put pressure on the regime on those fronts, even if we feel we have to make a nuclear deal. I hope that if we're going to make a nuclear deal, it's one worth making, personally. But I don't think that we should do that at the expense of all these other areas. And number two, I think there's a lot of other ways we can help Iranians through technology and so forth to overcome the censorship and repression that the regime tries to use. And one concern that I have is that as we start to narrow in our focus on this nuclear issue, we start to lose sight of those other things. And I think that would be a big mistake.
I just want to dovetail on that. I think there's an enormous amount of potential within Iranian society. It's actually a bundle of potential to bring about change. And this is one of, I think, the flaws of this administration and previous administrations in overlooking that potential. We saw that in 2009, the entire international community felt it was ambushed by the Green Revolution. No one predicted it. What I think it's important to remember is that we're dealing with great instability throughout the Middle East, especially in Iran. It's like Heraclitus said, everything's in flux. So Iran's regime or its populations in this situation could spill over onto the streets tomorrow and demand a democratic form of government. What we can do is, I think, work with labor unions, like the Reagan administration did during the Cold War with Lane Kirkland from the AFL-CIO, some of you remember him, and working with the Polish trade unions, Solidarity. There's great discontent among Iranian trade unions right now, the repression. So there's also the, as Michael pointed out, different ethnic groups, the Kurds, the Iranian Arabs. If you begin to, whether you do this covertly or overtly, begin to work with those groups to stoke discontent, and I don't mean that in a nefarious way because they have legitimate grievances. And I would argue, this may sound controversial, but if you're going to expect another green revolution, we should help the Iranians, dissidents or groups, train assassins. So instead of having Iranian regime snipers shooting at, remember Nadia, the young woman who died, killing Iranian Democrats, the West should be prepared to arm Iranians to shoot back at the regime.
I want to just add to that. Not that I'm against what you said, but I just want to say that supporting opposition groups, like the Mujahideen Khalq maybe, is not necessarily the solution, because some of these groups may turn against you, and obviously Afghanistan and the Taliban, or not the Taliban at the time, but the support for bin Laden proved a bit problematic down the line. Mali is a perfect example of just what just happened. The U.S. Special Forces training the same people that then turned around and fought them, or fighting the French now. So we have to be careful about who we help and how we help. Covert assistance is a double-edged sword.
Sarah Kortler from Oregon. I was wondering, do you think that if Iran managed to attain a nuclear weapon, that it would hang on to it to deter other countries, or would it hand it over to a terrorist organization?
Well, you can do both, first of all. I mean, you can have your own, and then you can also share the technology with others. And one of the big concerns about proliferation to Iran, about Iran's development of a nuclear weapon, is number one, let's put aside what they might actually do with their weapon. That's maybe a separate question, although obviously very concerning. Number one, that you'd have proliferation in the region that is inspired by countries who want to protect themselves against Iran. So you would see, for example, maybe the Saudis and others want nuclear weapons of their own. And then you're introducing this technology in a lot of other places, and therefore you're introducing a proliferation problem that spans the region, and you're introducing an element of instability. Because when we talk about nuclear balances, people sort of default to the Cold War, where it was mutually assured destruction, and you had almost a stable nuclear balance. You wouldn't necessarily have a stable nuclear balance in this region. In fact, I can almost guarantee you that you wouldn't have a stable nuclear balance. The question then is, what would Iran do? Almost every country, I think maybe every country that gets nuclear weapons has shared the technology with others. That's just the reality of how this proliferation chain has happened. Would Iran be different? Does anything in Iran's history suggest to us that they would be more careful with this technology than, say, China, North Korea, Pakistan, other countries? I don't think that anyone in this room would draw that conclusion. So again, a big concern here is that they would share with others. Whether those others are states or terrorist groups, I would argue they're both concerning, and they are both things we don't want to see happen.
My name is Mansour Shaul. I'm Iranian. I should sit over there and you ask me a question. I have a brother in Iran, I have a sister in Iran, I have a nephew in Iran. Everything we see here is very interesting. But actuality is not what we are talking here. A government, existing government of Iran, came to power with the help of CIA. CIA, Mr. Carter did not like the Shah. So, and also they scared the Shah getting too big, getting too strong, and the only way that stop influence of communism in Iran, they said that the government has to come to the power to be religious, this mullah. They were not, America was not expecting these people who are killer, terrorize people, they're going to come to the power. Iranian, they all love America. There is more Iranian doctor in America than in Iran. Any Iranian, Jewish Iranian, who live in Iran, they live comfortably because they keep their mouth shut and they don't say anything. This government of mullah, they're terrorizing and killing their own people and making a slavery system. While we are waiting for the time of this negotiation, for the idea of 6 months or 8 months, is all wrong. As long as it takes, this mullah gets stronger and not going to have any effect on those people. These mullahs have hired 2 million terrorism and killers, and who run the country? You have a question? Exactly like Hitler, they had killers. Whoever walks in the street, say something bad, they stop him, they terrorize him, they beat him up, they kill him, whatever they want to do.
Do you have a question, by the way?
My question is that let's stop thinking of this negotiation. The embargo not going to help whatsoever, because the mullahs, they have the Khamenei has $170 billion in saving. Not going to affect them. It affects general population. A group of people have, some of them they have good life, and most of them they don't have a good life. 7 million of addicts, of heroin addicts among young people. This mullah, that's what they are doing. So really, my question is that why are we talking about the negotiation? We have to go over there, get rid of this mullah.
So let me respond to sort of what you're saying. So first of all, I want to disabuse the notion that somehow the Carter administration was behind the 1979 revolution. That's not right, and I
Talking
think that
about Mossadegh, probably.
maybe
No,
you're-
no, no, not Mossadegh.
Okay,
never mind, yeah.
Please.
Both Zadeh came about to power. Both Zadeh
Sir.
was studying. No, no, let me tell you something.
Sir, please, maybe we talk about it afterwards, but
No,
I think
have
that
no question.
look, when you deal with the Middle East, I think that there's often conspiracy theories where it's the CIA that's behind something, or the Mossad, or the United States. And I think that indulging in these things is not helpful. I think it's unconstructive for the region because people need to, I think, see what's happening today and sort of come up with constructive approaches to how they're going to make their future better, as opposed to looking for these external explanations for what went wrong in the past. When it comes to negotiations, look, I don't disagree that the human rights of Iranians are important, that democracy in Iran is important, but I think it would be a mistake to view that as mutually exclusive from trying to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Because imagine how much more difficult it will be for the Iranian people if they want to change their government if the regime has nuclear weapons. And so this is a worthy goal to try to ensure that they don't. I think that the point of view of the US and our allies, including Israel, is that it's better to do it through negotiations if we can, and you use the military option if you need to. But think about what happened in Libya with Gaddafi. Would that have happened if we had allowed Gaddafi to get nuclear weapons? It's hard to imagine that it would have. And so I think that we shouldn't view these goals and these interests that we have as mutually exclusive and we have to choose this one and not that one.
So you spoke a little bit